Great. Well, welcome everybody to our IGIS workshop on ArcGIS Online. We are thrilled that you're here to joining us here today. Well, I want to tell you a little bit about us before we start, and for repeat customers, you'll know this, but we are part of the University of California Ag and Natural Resources, which is a network of people all across California in cooperative extension county offices, in research and extension centers, on affiliated campuses. And we all do applied work that focus on agricultural, natural resources, nutrition, youth development. And we do so to connect the power of UC research to improve the lives of Californians everywhere. And one of the ways that UCANR does this is through statewide programs. So there's a few statewide programs, perhaps you've heard of them, things like CalFresh or UC Integrated Pest Management or 4-H. We, IGIS, are one of those statewide programs, and we're here to help you integrate these tools into your everyday workflow. And we do it through these workshops and through we have office hours, and we have research support, and we have a service center. So check us out if you're interested. And who we are personally are the following people. Myself, Maggie Kelly, I'm the director of the program. And Sean, he is going to be your lead on the workshop today. So you'll hear from me in the beginning, and then Sean. And then in the background, helping you out if you have challenges, are Andy Lyons, Shane Fire, and Robert Johnson. They're all here to help you. So if you have any trouble, you can reach out into chat and say, this isn't working, or whatever. So we're here to support you. And who you are, you're mostly a California-based audience today, which is great. But to help us get a sense of your level, would you mind in the chat putting in your name and what you hope to get out of this workshop? And if you're not really sure, don't worry about it, but give us your experience with ArcGIS Online from 1 to 5, 5 being expert and 1 being beginner. And there's no worry wherever you sit on that continuum. We just want to see what we've got here. So who shall be the first brave soul to put their info into the chat? Let us know who you are. You're all shy. Just fine. Great. Natasha. Awesome. Sean, nice. Ooh, cool. Got a postdoc from UC Riverside. Great. Thanks, Hector. Mikala. I'm sorry, I'm not pronouncing your name, but it looks beautiful. Yeah, Shane, depends on the day. That's me too. Well, great. So we've got a range of levels, and that's perfect. We're gonna launch you in. So what we're gonna do today, we've done the introductions. I'm gonna give a little bit of a slideshow that gives kind of the framing of what we're talking about in terms of what is this thing called WebGIS? What does it mean in Esri? What does it mean in ArcGIS Online? And then just a couple of core things that we want to cover, but then we're going to dive into the workshop proper, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Sean will be leading this, and like I said, the rest of us will be here to help you out with any troubleshooting, but we're going to go over the basics, how to interact with data on ArcGIS Online, how to create these web maps and web apps, and we're going to have a lot of fun. Before we start, sorry, I'm skipping through this. I skipped through this slide. Before we start, let's just talk about what is WebGIS. So we talk a lot about, web apps, web mapping. All of these things are really based on WebGIS, which in a generic sense, a general sense, is any GIS that's on the internet. And these tools can be tremendously powerful for communicating complex data, for collecting data, They allow lots of users access to data through viewing, searching, querying, exporting. They're designed generally for an audience that are not GIS experts, so that the kind of heavy lifting goes in behind the scenes. And they can reach, they have a very big reach because they're served on the internet, and they're map based, and maps are a very effective way of communicating. And so we've all seen over the last 2 years examples like the COVID-19 dashboard that came out really quite early with Johns Hopkins. That was a web app. And then, of course, during fire season in California, we're all glued to various fire web apps showing perimeter changes of fires, etc. When we talk about WebGIS, we can talk about open source or free tools to create these things. And there are many on the open side: Google Maps, CartoDB, Mapbox, OpenLayers, GeoServer, MapServer, Leaflet. Some of these are free, some of these are open source. There's also proprietary, which generally means you have to have a license. They are attached to some kind of corporation. ArcGIS.com, ArcGIS Online, anything to do with Esri is going to be on the proprietary side, but it doesn't mean you can't use those tools to create freely viewable and freely, data WebGIS sites that can be used by many. In the Esri world, which is what we're going to concentrate on today, when we talk about WebGIS, we're talking about web maps and web apps. And there's slight difference between the two. Web maps are basically an online GIS that allows a user to turn layers on and off. You can sometimes play around with symbology. They allow sometimes some initial analysis. And we've created a lot of these web maps to serve data inside our institution as well as outside. And then web apps are much more complete products. They are web applications that are online, but they have a lot more customization behind them. You've constrained how the data is symbolized. You've constrained which layers you can turn it on and off. You've added a lot of widgets to them. You might have dashboards. The Story Map app is a web app that comes from Esri, and it has a lot of mapping capabilities. A lot of those wildfire apps that I was talking about before are web apps created out of Esri software. And the COVID dashboard, the one I mentioned just before from Johns Hopkins, that is also a web app developed from Esri technology. And that's what we're going to focus on today. So web maps in review, they're basic online maps with custom symbology. They've got some limited layout options, labels. They have some analysis capabilities sometimes. They're usually built to support something larger, which could be a web application. And these are very content rich, graphically appealing, variety of data sets, story maps, dashboards, smartphone apps. All of these things fall under the definition of web applications. And these often resemble a standalone web page that has mapping elements incorporated into them. And we do both of those things, web maps and web apps, in ArcGIS Online. And so why might you be interested in using ArcGIS Online? It's an Esri software. You might want to create web maps and web apps. You might want to be able to link to a whole lot of other apps to pull in to your final web app, like story maps or dashboards or field maps. You can do perform some simple GIS analysis. You can access loads of data. It's fast, it's intuitive, it's browser-based. And the Esri suite of tools likes to talk about why you would use ArcGIS Online in this way, because you can access loads of data, you have a lot of design capabilities, and then you can web develop your project. So you can pull data from Living Atlas, from your own local data set, from some external content. You do all this gorgeous design work in a web map, and then you basically publish the web app with other additional apps if you want to create a much more kind of robust and complex story. So ArcGIS Online is great. I love it. I do a ton of stuff in it, but it's not great for everything. It's not really that great for cartography. I wouldn't publish a journal article paper out of ArcGIS Online, but maybe I'm just not good enough. If you really want tight projection control, you probably should be in Pro. Advanced analysis like remote sensing, spatial modeling, working with LiDAR, reproducibility and coding is better in Pro, but that is really changing rapidly. So stay tuned to this space. But in general, if you are going to be doing some more heavy geospatial work, you're probably going to be working locally in Pro. This is just a summary of what I was saying. When we're in the Esri world, we're constantly thinking about moving back and forth between Pro, the local software. We have to download a software license file and install it, and working in the cloud in ArcGIS Online. And often we go back and forth between those two. And that's what this slide is to depict, that often we go back and forth. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time and talking about this going back and forth, because there's some interesting things that happen when you move to the cloud. So when you talk about GIS data locally on your desktop, when you're doing GIS, you're really talking about these local file formats. And two very common ones that you've probably all used a million times are shape files, with this totally awkward way of organizing data in a series of these, files that have to all be bundled up and moved around for it to work. Vector data is typically rendered commonly in local GIS programs in shapefiles, and then grids, which are the raster data file format. But when we move to the cloud, we don't talk about shapefiles and grids anymore. When we move to the cloud, we talk about layers and services. And layers are the data and the symbology attached to that. And services are the instructions on how that particular data layer can be used. And so you don't see in ArcGIS Online a shapefile. What you actually see is a layer with some services attached to it. And so everything you know about GIS, raster, and vector all applies, but it's just a different type of file when you move it into the cloud. You can have a feature layer, which is typically a vector layer. So instead of a shapefile, you have a feature layer. And then instead of a grid or an image, you might have a map image layer, or a web elevation layer, or a web imagery layer. There are also scene layers that are rendered for 3D work. And then there are tile layers. And these are all the gorgeous base maps that you see so often in web applications, web mapping applications. And so you've got these different kinds of layers, and you are going to constrain or define how those layers can be used through services. And services just define the protocol that says for one piece of software, I've got this layer here, you can do certain things with it. And the other piece of software says, great, I'm going to grab that and show it on my client application. And so services can constrain. So an image service, you can display it, you can download it, you can analyze the raster data. A map service, you can display it and you can download maps. A feature service, you can display it, download and analyze it. So all you need to remember is just, don't get into the details on this, just know the concept. When you see something like a web feature layer, you know that is basically a vector layer that you're going to be working with. And so this is just a repeat slide to remind you, we're talking about layers and services when we're in the cloud. The other thing we have to talk about when we're in the cloud with spatial data in the Esri environment is you have control over sharing. And so you might upload a piece of a shapefile from your pro into the cloud, and it's now a web feature layer, and you put it on your web map, but you might not have shared it so that everyone can see it. And so this happens all the time. You say, oh, check out my web map. And your grad student goes, I can't see that. And then you go, oh yeah, I forgot to share it. So you have to think about these things. It's different than when we work locally. So in the Esri world, you can share it just with you, just owner, only me. You can share it with your organization. And so with us, we can share it within ANR, or you can share it with everybody. And so sharing is going to be something we need to think about when we're working in the cloud. The other term here that's mentioned are groups, and groups are just another way of really organizing your data. So working with your data in the cloud is going to be different than working with your data on a local device, but you'll get the hang of it. And so where do you get data from? When you're working in the cloud, there's really generally 3 ways. You can basically download it from somewhere. You can say, okay, I'm going to direct download somebody's bunch of zip files and then maybe push them up, to ArcGIS Online themselves. You can find a site that actually serves their data in cloud native format in terms of layers and services. Or you can connect to a website that's pushing data through an API, application programming interface, which is essentially another set of instructions that says, here's our data, here's how you use it, here's how you grab it, here's how it's constrained, here's how you query it. So those are sorts of 3 pretty typical routes for getting data from the cloud. And once you're ready to start, Sean's going to walk through this, but the basic idea is that data, design, develop, protocol or workflow. Data is going to come from a whole bunch of different places: Living Atlas, ArcGIS Online, your local data sets. It's going to be in the cloud as feature layers or image layers or whatever you have, whatever type of data. You're going to push that data into a web map, and then you're going to push that web map to create a web app. And the funny thing about Esri is, you might already have come across this really all important web map step. There's 2 ways to do it. There's what's called a web map viewer and a web map viewer classic. So just be aware of that. Esri does this a lot. They'll have parallel tools at the same time while they're refining something, and then eventually Web Map Classic is going to go away, I think, but who knows? So right now we have two options. So you have a web map. You can push that web map into something called Experience Builder to build an app. You can push that the Web Map Classic into an Experience Builder or Web. This is another example where Esri has multiple kind of rival ways to do this. There's something called Web App Builder, and there's something called Experience Builder. It sounds crazy, but you will totally get the hang of it after this workshop. Or you can push it into something like Story Maps or Dashboard. But everything starts with building this web map, and everything starts to build the web map from finding your data. And there's lots of different sources for data. So quickly, I'll just cover a few kind of design considerations for web mapping. You want to be thinking about who are your users, who's your audience, who are your stakeholders, what is the objective of this map, what needs to be symbolized, keeping it simple and clean, how is it going to be symbolized, what to include and what to leave out. This is really important because we can build some phenomenally cluttered web maps that don't pack the same punch as a really honed message. And then, are there ethical considerations to the map? Do you have the right to share this data? You have to think about all of these things. Logistical considerations to think about. Do you want this web map to be static or do you want it to be dynamic? What kind of data do you need and where is it hosted? Are you pulling from an API? Are you storing something locally and then pushing it up? Is the web map going to be part of an existing website? Do you need to support this web map to look good on a tablet or a smartphone? And Esri does a phenomenal job about helping you visualize what it's going to look like on a phone versus a tablet. Do you need support for offline access? So if you're creating a field app, for example, to go out in the field where you might not have internet, do you need to have some offline access? Do you need to collect field data? How much programming is going to be required? We're going to have a kind of programming free afternoon. You can do a lot with programming, but you don't need to. And how much money are you willing to spend to make all this happen? And so that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to focus on the ArcGIS Online. I would like to point out there's a couple other workshops coming up if you're interested in this. We are going to do story maps, which again are these gorgeous content-rich data sets, websites that include maps. Then we're going to do an intro to Pro. I love ArcGIS Pro. And today we're doing ArcGIS Online. So we're going to have, I'm going to turn it over to Sean. He's going to decide if we're going to do a break or not right now. I can't remember. But always just, check if you're having trouble, reach out in the chat, check your emails. I know you got an email from Sean this morning, and I will turn it over to him.
Very good. As usual, that's the perfect introduction to what we're going to cover today. There's a couple little house cleaning notes here. We will have an evaluation at the end of the workshop that we very much appreciate, and we do read that. In fact, I read the evaluation notes from last time. It went really well, but there was a couple comments that came up, one of which was explain that it would be good if we explained the window arrangement at the beginning of the workshop, which I'll do. The one thing is, if you have a trackball or a mouse, that you will need it for ArcGIS Online. Also, if you ever do an ArcGIS Pro workshop, the same thing applies. So it's very hard to navigate if you're using just a touchpad on your laptop computer. One thing, save your work frequently. Every time we take a break, I'll try to remind you, but if I don't, then please save your work frequently, and I'll show you how to do that early on. Another thing is we need to take lots of breaks, because that gives people an opportunity to either catch up or experiment with the data that we're putting up on our screens, because we want to make sure that you have time to kind of wrap your head around all these different layers and techniques of analysis and display, computer cartography elements, all of that. I want to make sure that you have enough time to get out of this what you're looking for. And one more comment from last time's evaluations was, someone said it would be great if we recommended using 2 monitors. If you have that ability, that's great. You can also log on to Zoom via a tablet or another computer if you have one that's available. I mention all of this stuff right now because I'm going to start off with just an information only session to show you where all the buttons and levers, or maybe not all of them, but many of the button levers in ArcGIS Online and where they're at. And while I'm covering that, you can get your mouse or whatever if that's needed. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Also, one more thing, we are recording this, and I will render the video and put it up on our IGIS YouTube channel next week. It takes a couple days for that to render, but as a side note, we have a ton of great videos on our IGIS channel right now, including all kinds of stuff about drones, web mapping, ArcGIS Pro. You can look there for all kinds of great content. We also offer office hours on Mondays and Tuesdays, and you can find that information on our IGIS website. All right, I'm going to close out because I had some practice windows that were up. And what we'll want to do, speaking of setting up our windows, I would recommend putting your exercise off to the side. There's a couple strategies that people like to use when it comes to how to arrange their window. But the way I prefer to do it is have the exercise over on the side, and then we'll open up a web map and put it on the other side of the screen. The thing is that when I'm speaking and you're looking at the display here, and then you have the exercise that was emailed out earlier today. If you didn't see that, go ahead and go look for the exercise download at the bottom. There's also the presentation that Maggie just gave. It's included there for download. And you can open that up and put it to the side of the window. One of the nice things about that is that it has a bunch of useful links that are included in the exercise that you just have to click on. And sometimes it's a lot easier to go to a section of the exercise and copy and paste text to drop it into your search functions or your name when you create new names of files. I don't see one right here handy, but like you can see Caldor Fire, you can just copy and paste that into your ArcGIS Online for your searches. Next, I'm going to open up my ArcGIS Online login so I can do it fresh. This is what you will do. You don't have to do this right now, but it might be a good idea to log into your ArcGIS Online. You should have received that information from Shane or Robert this week if you didn't already have an account. One second. Oh, great. Does that sometimes. There we go. I'm going to put this off to the side with just enough of a sliver for it to partially cover up the exercise so I can click on this and toggle back and forth if need be. Some people prefer to follow along with the directions and listen to what I'm saying. And some people prefer to watch my shared screen, which in some ways I might argue might be better. I will go through the directions in order for the most part. Sometimes I'll not include things that aren't necessary for the sake of time. And sometimes I'll include other comments that are useful that might help you out. But if you follow my screen, you might want to have my screen over to the side where over the top of the directions and your map view on the other side of your screen. Yeah, I know it gets crowded. We only have so much real estate on the windows. And I know this takes a little bit of time at the beginning, but it really helps out people in the long run, it seems. When you bring up your ArcGIS Online, it'll either come up to your organizational tab or your home tab typically. There, in the preparatory email that I sent out earlier this week and yesterday, or this morning, though that suggested that you requested a license from ANR or from IGIS. And the reason for that is because a lot of other organizations, ArcGIS Online setups are different than ours. And we have like full-fledged licenses for all kinds of analysis tools and for data access through either ArcGIS Online or Living Atlas, which we'll cover. But we have all of that in our licenses. And sometimes that's sometimes that's probably the biggest problem we run into is people having limited access to these functions. If you have any questions about any kind of license stuff, Shane and Robert are here. We'll take a break in about 20 minutes and you can get on a breakout session with them and they can help you out, get set up. Good. So like I said, this is just going to be info only. It's nice to see get kind of an orientation to the application before we dive in over our heads. I noticed that everyone, or mostly everyone that I saw for their level of skill with ArcGIS Online was somewhere between in the neighborhood of like a 1 or a 2, which is good. It's a, we won't, I'll make sure that I paste everything that's appropriate for, or hopefully good for what you'll be doing. If you do have any comments or questions, or if you want me to slow down or speed up, please throw it in the chat. And I might not be able to see the chat while when I'm going through the steps, because my windows will be covering other windows up. But either Andy, Maggie, or Shane or Robert will see it, and they can moderate and let me know, or might be able to help out and answer the questions in the chat. Good. So ArcGIS Online, when it comes up, this is what it looks like for ANR folks. You don't really do much in your home tab, but it's good for display. It has some featured items. I'm going to go from left to right. Along the top, you'll see a contextual ribbon, a horizontal contextual ribbon initially. Sometimes this contextual ribbon will switch into just a drop down on the top left, which we'll see shortly. But for now, it'll be horizontal. And I'm going to go to the next tab, which is gallery. For an organization, so an enterprise account like this, you'll see access to all kinds of different layers, maps. So we have web maps that are within our organization, layers. We have thousands of these that we've compiled over the years. And if you're within the organization, you have access to all of this as long as it's been shared organizationally. You'll also have access to all kinds of other data. For example, the ArcGIS Online repository and Living Atlas, which we'll be diving into during the exercise. But just know that there's tons of data at your disposal here. Most of us folks that have been doing GIS for a lot of years can tell you, back in the old days, it was incredibly difficult to find data. And now there's tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of data sets that you're right there at your fingertips. It's a great time to be doing this. Sometimes just knowing the keywords to search are all you need. Like sometimes it's and sometimes I'll show you other strategies for discovering this data as we go along. Anyways, the gallery is where your organizational data is at. Next.
John, sorry, interrupt real quick. There's a couple of there's a bunch of chats that Shane should address while you're talking. It's about licensing and using not IGIS license, because I presume folks who are logged in with different licenses are not going to see all of this stuff, correct?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so it'll be a different group. If you're part of
Can they still do the exercise, or would you recommend them switching to our login for now?
The last time we did this, there was only one person that had a major issue, and they were using a UC Berkeley account, which didn't have extensions for some of the analysis tools.
Right.
And so Shane and Robert can probably already have licenses ready that they can set people up with.
Okay, so there's at least 3 in the chat right now. So while you're just keep going, and Shane and Robert can reach out to those folks.
Okay, great. And then we'll also take a break here, like a 10-minute break before the hour. So they'll have time also during that period to get set up. All right, moving on.
If I may add real quick, there shouldn't be any issues with licensing. Because the only time licensing should come into play is if we're using ArcGIS Pro. The only potential place it's an issue is if they're using a public account instead of an organization account.
Okay.
And I can read, if they're using a UC account, they should be fine.
Good. Actually, I can show you where. Well, we'll get to it. You can look in your organizational information and see what kind of accounts are available. But if you have issues, we'll sort that out. We'll make sure that we'll take a break for that for anyone that needs that too.
Absolutely.
Good. So when I clicked on map on the top horizontal banner, you'll see that it switched. I lost those those tabs across the top, and now they all lie underneath a drop down on the left side. This is the map tab, and this is the traditional view of Maggie noted during her presentation that there are more than one way of doing things in ArcGIS. They have all kinds of divergent pathways for working with your data, displaying it, creating web mapping applications, which is a term that's very similar to web maps. There's and during the workshop, you'll probably discover what the differences are between these things. But what we're looking at right here is a web map in the classic viewer. If you see at the top, you can say open in map in the new map viewer. We don't want to use that today because it doesn't have the analysis functionality yet. It's almost, I would almost say it's beta in some ways. It doesn't do everything that the classic version does. So we're sticking with this until they incorporate those tools into the new viewer. The thing about the new viewer, just as an aside, is it is really efficient for creating quick and easy maps. It's very nice in some ways. It's just not. This has just been developed with more power over time. When you get into your map, you'll see across here there'll be 3 tabs, and they'll be under the details. So the details is the option that then shows in this pane. We sometimes refer to this as the pane, and this is the window. This pane here has some about information. We will come back to this at the break if you like. You can go through these steps because it's this very simple tutorial to get you used to a couple of the basic steps of moving around or navigating your maps. Next, you'll have content. We can't really do much in here without any content, so I'm just going to load something in really quick. You'll do this in the exercise as well. I'm going to search for layers, not in my content, but in ArcGIS Online. Just type in counties. Already started to go. There we go. And enter. And Esri has a ton of data that's available in their repository that's as accessible as easily as that. So I'm going to click on USA counties. You'll see a bit of information there about that. And I'm just going to add this to my map. Whenever you have one of these panes that are open in your way, you can just click on the X, or sometimes there's a little back arrow at the top corner of the pane, or an arrow on this side. So now I have counties in there and I go in my contents, you'll see a bunch of options underneath this layer. This is a vector layer, polygons. It's not an image. It's a bunch of vectors that are delineated with little nodes just showing where the edges of all the counties in the United States are at. With that, there's going to be some options underneath the title here in the contents, one of which would just be the legend. There's also a table. So you can click show table. You'll see it'll show up across the bottom with each feature being a county on the left. So there's the names of the counties. And then each feature has a whole bunch of attributes, being the county name, the state, the FIPS code, population, there's demographic data, gender data, you name it. There's all this data that used to be really, really difficult to get your hands on, and now it's that easy to bring into your map. We'll look at data enrichment in a little bit. That is bringing this data into to joining it with some feature that you might want to join it with. But anyhow, this is the table that you see across the bottom here. If you happen to click on one of these areas, and I reduce this down and I can see the actual map, you'll see it highlighted on the map. This shows that it's been selected, that given county in Alabama has been selected. If I click off of that area, and I gotta get my zoom window out of the way. Or I can go over and click here and say clear selection. It will disappear. Next, across underneath counties, we have the change style. This is where you can change the way that it looks with the symbols. Sometimes I'll use the term symbology, which is the traditional way that an ArcGIS is used for describing the way something is stylized. Here, sometimes it'll be listed as style, sometimes symbols. But I can click here and change the color, the transparency, the outline. Depending on what kind of feature you have, you'll have more or less options for how you're going to symbolize the features that you have on your map. Let's shut this back because we're not going to go through it in too far now. Next, we have filter. Say you only wanted to show California's counties, you can filter out everything else here. We'll do that during the exercise, so I'm not going to show it now. And finally, you'll have perform analysis. This is where you won't have the raster analysis. That's something else that we have a temporary license for. But in here, you'll have all these options to be able to join your features. You can find locations. There's data enrichment I mentioned before, where you absorb, say, data from from a background database into a feature, and many more options that are available underneath analysis. And finally, there's these three horizontal dots that you'll use a lot. One of the things that you'll use a lot is zoom to layer, or zoom to. And I can click this and it zooms out to a range. Sometimes you'll have a whole bunch of data in your contents and you're searching for the features and you can't find them. Using the zoom to sometimes will get you there. Another thing that you'll use, and we'll look at this in a bit, is set the visibility range. This is the range that is visible at depending on how close you are zoomed into it. If I'm zoomed in this close, you can see this little dot or the little triangle at the top here. That's your current zoom rate. So if I zoom out further, that goes further out on the left. And if I zoom in, then the layer will appear. Usually you'll end up wanting to have that all the way to the side so it's visible at all zoom levels. Well, that's something we'll come back to over and over again, because when you download data, oftentimes the data comes in with the visibility range not appropriate for what you're trying to do on your map. Good. And then there's a couple more things we'll come back to later, including configuring your pop-ups and showing item details. We'll revisit that later, but I just want you to know that it's there for now. Good. Next, a couple more things this is something that's important. You'll want to save your data. The first time you save it, you'll have to I'm just give it a random name and call this junk, because I can search for my junk files later on and delete them, and I'll save the map. This is not what you'll be doing. You'll give it some kind of intuitive name and tag. You have to include a tag though. It helps it be more discoverable, both for yourself. Like I said, I can use the junk term to search for my layers and then delete them later, or have it be useful for sharing with partners on projects, for example, where you all want to be able to find, say, Caldor fire data. And if you put Caldor fire in that tag, then you can easily share and have it be discoverable. Good. The reason why I saved it is because the next step would be then to share it. This is where you have the option to share your maps with everybody. And I mean, that's everybody. Once it's been shared at a public level, then, and I click done, I can use this link right here to send to my work partners or my mom or my cousin or anyone, and they bring that up on a web browser and it will show the map that you just created. Pretty neat and fairly easy. Another thing, sometimes people want to embed their map on a website. You can get HTML code here to plug this in on on your web pages. And then I'll show you another way later on at the very end of the workshop on how to put your maps or your web mapping applications into an iframe, say on your website, if you're using any kind of website developer tool. Good. I went into the greatest description of the map pane here, this map functionality, because this is where you're going to spend the vast majority of your time when you're in ArcGIS Online. The other options here, I want to go over them fairly quick, because you won't use them as often, but they are interesting and important also. Any questions so far? Good. Just a few more minutes. Scene. Just going to show this to you. I don't use it that often, but it is really nifty because it allows you to look at three-dimensional perspectives of data. Here's are some automatic examples, but you can also develop your own maps as well and show data in a three-dimensional perspective. One thing that's neat about this is you can publish this and take something like the URLs from this or save it and put it into your story maps, which, by the way, we have a story map workshop in May and an ArcGIS Pro workshop in April 15th, and then May 20th, I believe, if anyone's interested. When you have the scene viewer, you can shift your scenes around and look at data from all kinds of different perspectives. And this is sometimes interesting to people that work with art or with CAD data, because there's functions that can allow you to bring the extensions allow you to bring CAD data into your ArcGIS Online now. Now I'm going to back out of this. I don't need to save it. So I'm going to go down to Notebook, which will be next. And I will just leave without saving these changes. Notebooks is a new-ish tool within ArcGIS Online that's super neat. One of the things traditionally about GIS is in the past, if not all of your analysis was done in your desktop environment. But now with the scripting options that you have, for example, through your notebooks, you can bring in code in, and I'm going to set up a new notebook. By the way, before I continue, it's really neat now. This is new, where there's standard processing, like dedicated computational like servers for your processing, or more advanced, and then yet even more advanced, because your standard processing using a script will be fairly slow. Some things you don't need it to be very fast, but other things you really do want to have a lot more horsepower for your processing. This is built on top of Jupyter notebooks. And if you are familiar with Python coding, then you can set that up in here and do all kinds of different analyses that you could never do before. Moving on. Oh, I got to go back to here. Oops, my zoom's in the way. So you get the options across the top. Now I went through notebooks, groups. Under groups, you'll see all kinds of groups. Earlier you saw where I went to share it, and there was options for sharing to everyone, sharing to organizations, or sharing to groups. This is where you can set up groups of people, say in teams within your organization, that might want to go out in the field and collect data. Would be an example, say using field maps, and everybody needs to be trained and know, like, be able to identify whatever types of features that you're trying to collect data on, and have the expert knowledge that's required for that kind of data collection. So you might create a group for that, or you might create a group for collaboratively working on some kind of web project. This is where you'd set up your groups. You can create a new group here, put in all the information, and once you've created a group, you can go in and invite users from your organization. Unfortunately, they've made it pretty difficult for you to be able to include someone from outside your organization, if not impossible. And so that is one little limitation here. And I'm talking about cross organizations, where if we wanted to share like include members from UC Berkeley or UC Riverside within our UCANR group, we'd have to set up another a license for that person here and couldn't cross over. But anyways, it's still a very nice function. Good. And I'm going to X out of this. Next, content. This is probably the second most important tab that you'll be using. This is where you can create new feature layers if you wish. You can explore all of your data that you personally have saved under your content or my content. There you can have tabs or folders on the left that have categorized sets of data. So all related data are within those folders. You can see that there's web maps in this case, featured feature layers, hosted. I'll explain hosted a little bit more later, or at least show you an example of why it's important sometimes to have your data hosted, meaning that it is saved within your content or within your organization in such a way that you can do all of the analysis and display options that you would like. Sometimes data is not quote unquote hosted, which limits your ability to say do a filter or to be able to save that data or a part of that data out or process it in different ways. So here's an example of feature layer. There's web maps, more web maps, tiled imagery layers in this case, and you'll see web mapping applications and story maps that might be included over here as well. Moving left, you can star some of these. Say if you saved something you're going to use a lot, you can add it to your favorites. And then when you go over to your favorite tabs, you can see some of the options that you end up using a lot, or some of the maps that you use a lot that you want to come back to over and over again. You can see your groups again, but we're just in the groups tab, so it's a little bit redundant. Organization, similar to the gallery. And then there's Living Atlas. You can look at Living Atlas. Actually, you can look at Living Atlas data in 3 different ways. And that reminds me, the last thing I'll show you here is up here on the top right, there's this little cluster of dots. If I click on that, you'll see all of these peripheral applications that are associated with ArcGIS Online. And thinking of ArcGIS Online kind of like a hub, all of these apps can interrelate with ArcGIS Online. This is one of the things that makes ESRI, or the parent company of ArcGIS, so powerful, is they have so many of these different apps that all are tied together, as opposed to, say, if you want to work with QGIS, which is an open source application, you can't just publish that data up to a web map. You have to start a whole new open source online map. But Esri has it figured out where everything is intertwined. Well, not everything, but you can cross over from app to app. And I mentioned Living Atlas. You can look at it in different ways. One way is if you click on it here, you can see a different way of browsing the Living Atlas data. And sometimes I like to use this for exploring different data options, because they have tens, hundreds of thousands of data sets that are underneath in this repository. And you can go in and look for imagery and find keywords that you can then use within your ArcGIS Online map session to go out and look for that data and discover it and add it into your projects. Good. See, back to that. So there's also, under that cluster, one more thing before we take a break, is you have the ArcGIS Online tab, which seems kind of funny that you would have this, but I use it quite a bit now. And the reason for that is sometimes you'll say I'm here and I have this banner across here, and I want to be working both in my map, but also looking at my content at the same time. I can click on this tab and it adds a new tab to the top of my window without having to log in again. So I can I can then have two ArcGIS Online windows open at the same time. This is particularly useful when you have your map that you're working on in one window and your web mapping application in the other window. You can navigate to each one in a different window. The reason for that is you'll find out as we go on that your web map is the foundation for your web mapping applications, which it takes the map as it is base level and allows you to add on legends and titles and other kind of widgets into your map to kind of make it look more like a full-fledged map website. I think that's enough information for now. And what we'll do is what I'd recommend that you do a couple things. One, if you are not set up with a license, let's reach out to Shane or Robert and they can help you get set up. If your license seems good, you can go to your map right now. Go to about, oh, I already have a map in here. I have to create a new map. So that's one thing. If you go back to a map, then it'll be, it has anything in it, it'll return to where you were at and it won't give you the option that I'm looking for here. So what I did is I went to new map. When you first go into a map, under details, under about, you'll have a couple options as a basic tutorial. If you'd like to play with that now, go for it. Otherwise, let's take a 10-minute break and I can answer any questions and Shane and Robert can help set you up with licenses if you need them and stretch your legs and we'll be back at, let's call it 2:10. Good. Let's give you a couple minutes to this while Shane is helping out Hector.
Yeah, and Natasha had a question also about adding layers with shapefiles and whether that's better than pulling from a website.
Oh, it's just a different need. Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah, it's just a different need that you have. Sometimes it's just more easily accessible from online. And sometimes you'll have your own data sets that you want to upload from your local computer onto your ArcGIS Online, which is when you would use the shapefile.
I could add one thing to that.
Yes.
Yeah, sometimes you have to upload a shapefile because the layer doesn't exist on AGOL
Right.
or some other organization's not sharing it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can definitely zip up shapefiles. You can load them up there. The link I put in there says what you can do with different types of spatial data formats that you upload.
Mm-hmm.
And shapefiles are very flexible. You can do pretty much everything. So that's a good choice if you want to share the spatial layer in a web map.
Another reason why that sometimes is necessary is that you will do more analysis in your desktop, in your desktop GIS, that is, and that might include like some spatial statistics with attributes of your shape files that you then will update and then can upload to your ArcGIS Online for your web display of that analysis results. All right, I think Hector's still gone, but is everybody, let's see, how's everyone doing? Have they gone through the about basic tutorial? Oh, there, Shane's back. Okay, we can get going. Good. See if Hector's come back in. All right, let's continue. If you have gone through these steps on the left, which are not necessary, this is just to get a kind of a warm up, we're going to want to start a new map, in which case you'll go over to the left top right corner of your screen and select new map and then create new map. Create a whole new map, and then you'll end up having what we're looking at here. As you'll see, if you look at, oh, I'm gonna get the breakout room window out of the way. Good. You'll see on the left side, we've went through a bunch of information. And I know I probably fire hosed you with more than you could absorb initially, but the repetition of seeing and then doing this, I find seems to work well for people. The one thing that I didn't cover in quite as much depth is included in the exercise directions is information about all of these peripheral apps, but we're not necessarily here for all the information about field maps and survey 1, 2, 3 and so forth. So that's why I didn't cover that so much. But now we're going to move on to the exercise steps. One thing to note about how you can go about reading this is that you'll see exercise and it'll give you directions on steps to take. But then sometimes I will have sections that are labeled info or information only. And that's just so you can kind of, you get, there's a lot of information that's in the kind of the background or surrounding what we're working on that you don't necessarily need to take any steps, but it'll help you understand what's going on. We just did this, the preliminary adding data through the left side on your about. So we're going to skip past that. And we're going to start adding data from a variety of different sources. The first source that we'll start off with will be from ArcGIS Online. So what, and if you saw how fast I went through the first beginning stuff, I can allay your concerns that now it's time for me to slow down, and I'll try to give you plenty of time to be able to follow each of the steps that I go through. The first step, if you could log in and you go to, if you might end up on your home. If you're not already here, go to the map tab. And then while you're in your classic map view, here is what we're looking at on my screen. We'll go click add, the drop-down arrow under add. And we're going to select search for layers as the first option. You'll see there's a bunch of other options like data from Living Atlas, add layers from the web, add layers from a file, which means you're pulling them up from your personal computer, and then map notes, which is one of the things included in the starting tutorial that's seen below. But for now, we're going to go search for layers under add. And automatically it'll come up to my content. But if you're just starting this stuff, you're not going to have any content under my content. So we're going to switch with the drop down underneath there and go to the very bottom to ArcGIS Online. You can see again, there's sometimes plenty of redundancy on how to get to data or use different tools. But in this case, this workflow gets you to adding data from ArcGIS Online. Once we're here, just like I did during the introduction, just type in counties. And in my case, it's the first thing that's there because what I last searched for. And once you search for counties and click enter, you have to click enter. The first option will be the USA counties layer from ESRI. And they do updates every so often, but if you want more information about the data and updates, sometimes that will be included in here. This shows that this was created in 2013. So I mean, I don't know how often counties change, probably not very often. So I'm sure that's good. But the update information right there doesn't necessarily mean that's how recent this data is. But you can get all that information here. Something to note, if you're going to publish this, it's good to have confidence in the data that you're showing because not all of the data on here are made equally. They come from all kinds of different sources, and this will give you a little bit of a sense of how credible that data is. And then, and if you're going to attribute it to someone, say in a publication or a website, you might include the source credits there. For now, I'm going to click add to map and it comes on. I can X the pane here to reduce that down and then click the drop down arrow on the far left side. And then I can reduce this as well with the click of close, a little triangle. So you can see all the map data. I close that on purpose all the way because I want to show you how to get it back. Sometimes you accidentally shut that down, and all you have to do is click details again, and you get your side pane back. You'll usually always want to have that open. Next, we're going to go to content. As I went through it before, I want to just show you that, just let you don't change anything for now. We'll get to that when we're styling our map later on, but I want to give you a moment just to look through the different options under the USA maps. There's the legend, the county's attribute table, the style. Just peruse that for a couple minutes just so you can see what is there. I could describe it, but it's a lot easier if you just go through it on your own. At least it's so I've been told. Good. So yeah, you can just flip through those options. Don't forget to hit the 3 horizontal dots, drop down, check your transparency, your zoom level, play with that for a moment. You can zoom too. You might only be interested in the continental United States or just in California. So you can zoom to any given level that you want for now. The idea here is to just kind of get a little bit oriented with how to, what's available on a given layer. Good. All right, now if you've practiced that a little bit, now I want to step to something that's important, that is easily forgotten, and anyone that's done GIS for a while can really, they'll might be like shouting from the rooftops, telling everybody, please do this, is save. And so we'll go up to save in the top center of your map, click that. The first time you save it, it'll automatically go as save as, but I'm going to click save as because I've had some other maps under here. And here, I'm going to just give it a title. I'm going to just say AGOL practice for me. Whatever name you give it, you might say AGOL workshop, whatever title you want. It's fine as long as it's intuitive. And then for tags, give it a name. I'm going to say junk, not that it's junk necessarily, but just that every time I do this workshop, I don't need to have another web map that's going to be built over and over again. And then I might put in training. I can discover that in my contents different ways. If you had different folders, you can select which folders they go into. I might put it in my training folder. You don't need to do that. You can just leave it in the default. And once you're done, click Save Map. Good. Whenever you you're working on your map and you're thinking of doing any kind of analysis, especially, or if you're going to leave your map, say to go to your contents, anytime before you do that, make sure you save your work, because you might come back and it won't be there anymore. And then you have to rebuild everything. And that can be minutes at time. It could be hours at time. It just depends on how long you've been working and how complex it might be. We'll get to how to share this at a later point. Good. Let's go to adding some more data. While we're here, and I should frame this. This workshop's going to be fire related. Specifically, I'm going to bring up data from the Caldor fire, and I got a little story I could tell you about that later, but we'll be searching for fire data next. So I'm going to go up to add, search for layers, by default, it's going to come up to the last thing that you search for. If it doesn't for any reason, you search for layers, you click the drop down, sometimes it's my content, and go to ArcGIS Online. We'll still be in ArcGIS Online. And I'm going to X out of counties because I'm not going to be looking in counties right now. Instead, if you look down in the exercise, the next thing we'll be looking for is we're going to search for Caldor fire. I'm going to go back to my map and adding Caldor fire and click enter. So the first thing that comes up should be the Caldor 2001 DINS public view. I'm going to click on this. And what this is the Caldor Damage Inspection Database is what the DINS acronym stands for. This layer will show all of the houses, structures in general that were destroyed by the Caldor fire. When I click add to map, what it should do is zoom to the area where those map features are at. In my case, right underneath my zoom window. Good. So this comes from Cal Fire. And so again, this is something you could probably trust. It's good quality data. And if you ever wanted to, you can click the remove from map if it's not what you're looking for. Alternatively, sometimes you can do, if you know you want it, you can just click on the little, don't do this, but you can click on the little plus sign and it'll add it in directly without having to open up the view of it. That's if you already know what your data is. So I'm going to use my scroll to get that over there. Good. Now we can search for more data, but I have one more layer that I know is down search that's not far down below this is the Caldor fire soil burn severity team data. So we can search for that if we wanted to put that up here, copying and pasting from the exercise, but it is a lot easier just to go down and click on this. You'll see it doesn't show anything here, but when I add it into my project, it's a neat layer. But one thing about this layer though, and I mentioned this earlier, and this is a very common, I wouldn't say problem so much as an issue that you do have to deal with. First I'm going to close this down. I'm going to reduce my adding data pane down. I'm going to see the burn severity layer at the top of my contents. By the way, if you're not familiar with GIS in general, the layers that you're seeing in your map window are layered in the same order that you see them over in your contents pane. So if something is on top in the contents pane, it's on top in your map. Now watch what happens if I zoom out. It disappears. It totally disappears. And if you remember what I mentioned earlier, and it also grays out here. The reason for this is if I click on these three dots, so after you've added in your Caldor fire burn severity team data, and you've zoomed out and you see it disappear, click on the three little dots and then go down to set visibility range. If you see on my screen, the triangle for how far out zoomed I am is beyond the gray area. The gray area here is the visible range. So if I grab the pointer and drag it all the way over to the far left, the world level, then it'll appear on my map at any zoom level that I'm in. And that's how you'll get your layer to come in and stay that way. Good. I'm going to pause for a second. Did anybody have any trouble getting in that data? So far we should have the Caldor DINS public view and the Caldor final soil burn severity team data.
I have a question.
Yes.
How do I get back those tabs with the 3 dots.
Oh, you mean these 3 dots here?
Yeah, like that whole row, it disappeared from my.
Huh.
I have all the 3 like check marks and that folder like looking thing down there for the county, I think.
Okay. So sometimes you'll have to bring up details
Hey, Sean,
and make sure it's
she,
under content.
she may also want to try to click on the label. So if you click on Caldor, if you click on that, it sometimes will collapse and open.
Okay.
It's worth a try.
Oh yeah, that worked. Thank
That did
you.
it? Okay, great.
Yeah, great.
Very good. So by the way, this is, I mean, I could say that sometimes all GIS applications can be kind of finicky, but one thing that comes up is if your screen is crunched one way or another, if say this is too far over to the left, you see that stuff it disappears more for some layers and some layers not. If it depends on scaling of your entire window too, will affect that. Oh, good. I'm glad that you got that sorted out. Good. So next, I say sometimes half the battle for dealing with your data is just keeping it sorted and organized in a way that's so it represents it the way you'd like. And one way you can do that is just drag and drop your layers in an appropriate order. So the kind of a convention is to have your smallest and most important layers on top and your larger layers down below. The thing is I have the DINS public view points are below the Caldor final soil severity layer. And so they're buried. So the way to get around that is grab these 3 vertical dots on the left, not to be confused with the horizontal dots, and just drag the layer one below the other, and the dot and all of those features will appear on top of your map. Something else that's important, not just for your own benefit of understanding what you have, or even just being more intuitive, but also because it matters when you're actually creating a web mapping application or you have a legend on a web map that you're sharing with anyone later on. And say Caldor 2021 DINS public view, that's not going to mean anything to anybody. You can change the name. So let's do that now with the 3 horizontal dots on the right. Click that. The 4th option down is rename. And we can change the name of this. You'll see a lot of GIS people include underscores. It's a convention to make sure your data works and operates in different processes. But here it doesn't matter. We can have spaces in the layer name. So we'll say Caldor 2021 structure damages. Good. Now that makes a little bit more sense in the context of the map. And you can change the name of the other one too if you'd like, but I'm not going to worry. But I just want to show you that that's a good idea, is to change the names of your layers. Actually, go ahead. Feel free to change the other name. Rename. Oops. There we go. And I'm going to click OK. Good. The reason for this is that the names here will propagate out through any kind of applications that you use later on, whether it be a story map or any web map application for a website or a collector app or a field map. That name will carry through and be displayed there as well. So having good intuitive names is a plus. The next steps in this is we're going to add we already added that. We went over the steps here on the exercise. Next is going to be adding data from Living Atlas. I showed you how you can use you can search for Living Atlas online. You can, if you're not inside your map view, if you're outside of that, you can use the dots at the top to search for Living Atlas, to browse layers, but we're not going to do that right now. You can do that at your leisure though. There's so much neat data there. But we're going to use some Living Atlas data right now. And specifically, I'm going to look for wildfire risk to communities data. So you can go to your exercise if you'd like right now. We're on page 16. Second from the bottom, wildfire risk to communities. And here, I'm going to go to my add data, search for layers, or we can just go straight to Living Atlas because that's what we're going to want to use to save a step. If you just went search for layers, you can also go down and click Living Atlas there. And I'm going to put in wildlife risk to communities. You probably, if you type in wildfire risk, that'll probably get you far enough if you click enter. Once you've entered this in, I'm going to, there's a bunch of different representations of this data. It all comes from a similar data source. But for now, I think the one that I decided I kind of like the best is the wildfire risk to communities, risk to potential structures, the second one down. So I can click on that. You can see what's called the metadata is the information or the data about the data. This one gives you a bunch of robust information about it. If you ever want to use this kind of data on a project, it's nice to have that information for citing and also text to describe resolution and all kinds of other things that make publications or manuscripts a lot better. And I'm going to click Add to Map. And then after I've done this, it's going to take a little bit of time to render, but I'm going to close this, reduce the Living Atlas on the left, and you'll see that it appeared on my screen here, but I don't see anything new on my map. The first thing that I would do if this was, in my case, is I would go over and hit the three dots on the right and check the visibility range. Oh, okay. It might just still be rendering. It shows that it should be able to be displayed. I might have to zoom a little bit. Oh, I see what the problem is. Oh, of course. Wait a minute. Maybe no, that's not, of course. This was written to the bottom. I was looking at the top one because I assumed it would be putting it in my contents on the top. It didn't. It put it on the bottom and it's below the USA counties. So if I raise it up a level and drag it up, what the heck? Did I bring it in as a base map on accident? If I turn off US counties, there it is.
Turn it back on, Sean.
US county, what's that?
Yeah, turn back on US counties real quick. Yeah, where the counties must not have a is it because your counties has a fill?
I haven't noticed that before.
Because I think your counties right now has a fill in it, so it's
okay.
Wait, hold on.
What my guess would be, this is interesting because this didn't happen to me last time I did this. Oh, but I do have an idea. If I search for layers, Living Atlas, that layer comes up. I click on it. It might have, oh, yep, I did it because I was navigating around my zoom tab that was covering up part of the information. I added it as a base map instead of add to map. So if I click add to map, it'll come in again. I'll reduce this, and then I should be able to drag one of them above the others. Yep, that's right. Or at least I thought I should be able to drag it above others. Anyhow, we don't need to use this map so much, but it gives you an alternate to the US counties. So, and what we've used this in the past before is also as a potential that then if you are considering doing analysis, you could look at the potential fire risk and compare it to how the potential for that fire actually panned out when the fire burned, in it, comparing it to an actual fire severity map. So I don't need both of these. And so I'm going to remove one. Actually, I'll remove both and you can do the same. Click the 3 dots and then click remove. There we go. Because we're not going to need that. We're going to look at other options for your background later on, which is under your base map at the top. Good. Back to the exercise. The next layers are completely optional. I'm going to go for fire risk and look for US. Actually, we'll search for US current fires. There are none really, but I'm going to, because it's just not the season. This is really interesting if we're doing this workshop in like September or August. But if I add the data, search for layers, and this, by the way, again, everyone, this is optional. So what I did is I just copied and pasted USA current wildfires, going to my search for layers in Living Atlas, and click enter. If I add this, and I'm just going to click the little plus sign on in because I know what this is right now. So you pretend that you do too, and you click it here, it'll automatically add it to the map. And you won't see much until you zoom out. You'll see some very, very minor fires. If you click on some of these, it'll give some information about the fire. You'll see this data reported during fire season all the time. So variations of the same underlying data set. Fortunately, ESRI supports a ton of fire response data during the burn season. It's one of the services they provide. But right now they're not supporting a lot. There's no shape fire, no features that are perimeter data and so forth to go along with this. So we're not looking at too much. Besides that, another neat layer, and again, this is optional. You don't need to put this in, but it's fun to put in air quality data sometimes because that becomes a major issue. I know here in Davis, right after the Caldor fire, there was a day when you couldn't even see a couple hundred yards down the street. So I'm going to put in air quality and click enter here. And the air now data, you can click on it to get information about it. And then I'm going to add it to my map. This provides the air quality. So the lower the number, the parts per million or whatever the count is, the air quality count. If it's down in say the 7 or the 37 values, that's pretty good. During the Caldor fire, this was 900 and this was 1250 right here. So very, very high. You hear those air quality index on TV. This is the data, underlying data. Now, a good question, and I put this up for a reason, even if it's just for info only, is that this data is updated. And I think the air now data is updated just about every hour. Other data sets are updated at different intervals, but this particular one is updated all the time. And if an update happened and I shifted my map or open the map again, it would bring in whatever the new updated value is. So it's dynamic and currently changing. That can be a bit of an issue when you're when you want to have, like, you want to really know what the data is in the future on that given date. And the way there's a couple ways you can do that. Sometimes you can just save the layer, but another good way to do that is if you have some kind of basic background layer, for example, the counties that we have, you can use your analysis tools to join this layer to the hosted feature layer that you have, and then it'll create a feature layer in your content with this value included. Does that make sense? It takes it from being a dynamic layer. If you went, and you don't need to do this, don't do this right now. But if I went to here, clicked on the analysis, feature analysis, and you can either do an enrichment, you can do join features. And if I join that with the US counties, the outputted layer that would go into my contents would be a permanent file that would no longer update. So that's a way of creating the hosted feature layer in your contents folders. And that was one of the things I mentioned earlier that could be a help to, who was that? Was that Jenna that had the question about data that wasn't, you couldn't do everything you wanted to? That might be a workaround that you could use to get greater access to that data. All right, anyways, I digress. And we're almost ready for another break here in a moment. Good. So we have this data in here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to turn off my legend. I'm going to turn off any of these layers that I don't necessarily need right now. And we're going to add one more set of data, and then I want to take a break. And then we'll save the data. We save the project too. So then the last thing we do before we go to break is I want you to go on page 17, right underneath exercise adding tabular data. Copy and paste or open that link to Google Drive, and it'll come up here. It'll look something like this. What this is the locations of all of UCANR's facilities, including cooperative extension and advisor offices throughout all 58 counties of the state. And here I want to go up to the download button at the top right corner of this Google Drive screen and click download, and it'll come down into your download folder. If I open that, which I'll do right now in Excel, this is what it's going to look like. It's going to have a field ID. It's going to have a location, so a description of the site, and an address. One of the neat things about ArcGIS Online is that it can take addresses such as this, or latitude and longitude, and create points on your map from data that you're providing. And so I'm going to close this down. Don't save it. It's fine. That's in a CSV file format, by the way, too. I'll show you why that's important. Now, if I go back to my map, so if everyone goes back to their map now, click add, the drop down. And this time, instead of the searching for layers or the living atlas, we're going to go down to the fourth option, which is add layer from file, and click that. Good. So before we continue, just you can look at this for a moment. So there's different types of file formats that you can load, one of which being a shape file. And whenever you load a shape file up, it needs to be zipped up or compressed, all the contents, because a shape file is actually 4 to 9 different associated files. They have to be all zipped up together. It can be a CSV file, which is why this was important that I mentioned that be a CSV file or a text file, not a shape file, not an Excel file, but a CSV file. It can be GPX, which is the proprietary format for Garmin GPSs that now more like your phones use as well. And GeoJSON is another common file format. But those are the file formats you can use here. I'm going to choose file. I'm going to go to my my ANR location CSV that I just downloaded. Talking so long, I need a sip of water there. There we go. Good. Select that from your downloads. You might have to navigate to your downloads. So I'll give you a minute. And then open it. The rest is pretty easy. All you do is click import layer. The defaults, it should automatically recognize what the defaults are. Sometimes if you have latitude and longitude, you have to play with that a little bit, but generally it'll recognize what everything is. And then click add layer. And you can see where all the ANR locations are across the state. Good. So what I want to take a break now. I think that's plenty of time. Let people decompress a little bit. And the next steps in the exercise are going to largely relate to styling your map and then creating something at the end that you could publish and put on a web page, for example, and we'll go from there. And if anyone has questions, throw them in the chat. You can actually just shout out your questions. We usually default to the chat more often, but we have a small enough crew today that just asking questions is more than welcome. And let's take a break until about 3:04. I want to make sure everybody gets the time to, like I said, decompress a little bit. Sounds good? I'm going to go to the chat myself and check it out. Oh, and save your project. Save it now.
Sounds good, Sean.
So what I did while we were on the short break there is I set up our site builder for ANR. I created the initial part for generating a new web page, because then when we get done with creating our map, I can show how I could add this into a web page and then display it. Well, we'll do that right at the end. Good. But for now, we'll just carry on. And where we're at now is a little bit up from here. I also skimmed through what the next steps are. Good. So we just added tabular data. Before I continue on, because this is very useful, is you sometimes might want to add data, for tabular data from Google Drive, from a sheet. And if you do want to do that, I know not everybody uses Google Drive. Us in IGIS are pretty big on Google Drive, so we use it sometimes. But here is a link, or a link to go get directions on how to import Google Drive sheets in, just like you did the Excel CSV document before. The neat thing about that is if you say you're working collaboratively with team members, each of you can update the data there, and then that data can remain dynamic in some cases. So your map is automatically updated with updates to your data. Good. Now let's move on. We're doing some transformations and analysis. Said we're gonna this last better part of an hour, we're gonna focus mostly on creating some neat web maps. We've got the data in there now. Now let's tweak it a bit and then and symbolize it so it looks good. So that's a lot of the kind of the creative fun part. One of the first things is being selective about data. shut the chat window down, is you'll see you have all this data on here, and oftentimes it's way more than you possibly need, and it isn't stylized or symbolized in such a way that what's important pops out. And of course, this is theme dependent. And what I'm going to try to kind of tentatively do here is work toward a theme of relationships between damaged but not destroyed structures related to the Caldor fire. While I have this up, I might mention, because I mentioned before, I have a little story related to this, is what was kind of the impetus for creating this workshop in the way that I did, is when this large red hot heavily burned area happened, it happened almost all in one day. My property is right about in the center of the screen right here, just off of the point where it pokes up here. And actually, oops, a little bit over this way, looking at the wrong roads. So my property I have property off of Steely Ridge Road, and my dad also is right there in the neighborhood. And in one night I was staying at my dad's because I knew the fire was coming. It jumped over the fire lines and burned up to 800 feet of my dad's house on one side, 550 feet on the other side, and 1,200 feet on the other side. But his house didn't burn all the way with fire spots. What got me going on the fire mapping at that moment was I went online and I couldn't find any good near real-time data or real-time rendered maps of how the fire was progressing, and kind of had a vested interest in it. So I started digging for layers and created my own map. And because it was better than anything I found online, I shared the map, and within 3 weeks, it had been used 92,000 times. Because I wasn't the only one looking for a good map. The moral of the story there, though, is that there was ongoing effort that was involved, but I had a web map up that was extremely useful for much more than myself in like 4 hours. And you can see how like important that'd be, especially if you're right along the edges of said fire area. I'll show you here in a moment how to bring in some of the Cal Fire data too, right before we start making our final map. But yeah, that was quite an interesting time right there, and a good example of how useful this online mapping can be. That would not have been possible years ago when you're just doing like desktop mapping to have all that access that quick. But I digress. So back to what I was about to do here was to bring to let's see, the tabular data. Looking at the tables of the data and filtering. So we have too much features for like a given analysis here. And I mentioned before, go with the theme of looking at partially damaged structures close to ANR facilities. Because some of our ANR facilities have like FNEPs and CalFresh, fire plans. There's all kinds of services offered through ANR for people around the state. And so that could be a theme that would be important and relevant. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to limit all of these damaged structures down to a subset. And the way that I'll do that is I'll go and find the current wildfire. Oh, no, that's not it. The damaged structures. I'm going to grab that, drag it all the way up to the top, because I want to work on what's most important on the top. So I have the Caldor 2021 fires on top. I'm going to click the actually, let's do the table first, the table option. And you'll see these attributes. There's damage, structure type, and those are the key 2 columns. Because it has those categorical columns, you can filter by them. And how I'll do that is I'll click filter. So that's that little funnel with the yellow next to it under the Caldor structure damages. And on here, I'm going to leave it as damage is. I don't want the destroyed structures. I want the affected 1 to 9% structures for now. You could also add another expression. We will add another expression actually, but I'll have that and I'm going to add another expression. And you could have also added the minor damage, but we're not going to do that now because that's the processing time gets really slow. And I don't expect you to process it, but it would be for the sake of the directions to keep it simple it's just a few features. And then on the damage here, I'm on the second one down, I'll click the drop down arrow and select structure type. And the default should be single family residence. There's all kinds of other options, but single family residence, single story is good for now. And then when I'm done with that, I can click apply filter and you'll see that then just those structures are the only things left on my map. Just to note that after you've done a filtering process like this, then if you do any kind of analysis, whether it be a join or data enrichment or any other form of analysis, that analysis will only be conducted on the features that are showing on your map. It won't do all those background features as well. Speaking of those other options, and by the way, if you look at the directions, you'll see these listed as optional. They're not critical for what we're doing in terms of creating a map for our final product here, the computer cartography element, but I want to show you just a couple analysis steps because they're useful and they're and you can create products that are important for your map sometimes. But the way one of these options, be an enrichment, is important for sometimes for creating a hosted layer that's your own instead of Esri's or I forget who was the Cal Fire, whoever was the owner of this data set. Sometimes you want to download it into a permanent file that you will control. And what I can do then is I can click on perform analysis here, or I could click up here, but I'm going to click on the little box perform analysis. I have to select feature analysis. You should only have one choice. And then I'm going to go down to data enrichment and click on enrich layer. So we're going to go with the layer because if we had clicked it up here, we would have had to select which one. But since it's at the top and it was selected through the box, this will be the default. I'm going to go down to select variables under number 2. And it'll give you a whole bunch of different options for types of data that are stored in ArcGIS Online in the background in a database that you'll have access to. That are, again, they're spatially referenced in the background of all of your data as needed. And you can include any of these, but I'm going to, just because we're looking at fire data, I'm going to click the right arrow on the right side and go over to landscape. Is everybody tracking there? I know that was maybe a few steps. I'm going to back up and do that again. Actually, I'll cancel it. I'll do it one more time. So I went to analysis, Caldor structures of fire damage, or the DIMS data set if you didn't change the name. Select variables, go to the right with the right arrow, and then click landscape. And then I'm going to click land cover. And for some unknown reason, I don't have any land covers showing up. I just did this an hour ago. Does anybody else see something other than nothing? It shows 7 variables. Hold on a second. I'm going to back out of this and start my analysis again. What I might do is I'm going to save my map, by the way. This is a good time to save your map anytime before you do an analysis. Feature analysis, enrich layer, structures, select variables, United States, landscape. Look at that. Is that odd or what? Now it pops up. Okay. And then I'm going to click land cover. And then shows the 7 variables that you would have thought had been there before. And I'm going to click % of forest. And I just want one variable for right now. And then I'd click apply. I want to go through these steps, not necessarily because we have to apply this, because it'll take 2 or 3 minutes if you do apply and do the analysis.
Hey, Sean,
yes.
can you do me a favor? Can you go back? You don't have to go anywhere. Michaela is asking about why analysis isn't showing up on her account.
Is it an ANR account?
I do not know.
Let's see.
No, it's not. So that might be it.
That might be it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that.
It's okay. It's okay. It's fine. But again, this is just optional. You won't. You can just watch this and it's okay. It's not going to be. In fact, everyone can just pretty much watch this, because I don't want to use up 3 minutes or 2 minutes while it absorbs the % cover around the points. But I did want to go through the steps to show you a couple things. One is it's going to start crunching numbers based on the underlying data, which, unless I'm mistaken, comes from Landsat data originally for forest cover. So it's 30-meter pixels, which is about 100 yards anyways. So we might just use the few pictures that are around the given point instead of a whole mile, and then it's less processing. And something key to know is, if anytime you do analysis, there's 2 things to look for. You want to set your name correctly, and also use current map extent. That will keep you from analyzing anything that's outside of your view. But that can be a problem, is if you are too zoomed in, and say you're only zoomed in on one of these features, say it's just this green semi-burned structure, and you run the analysis, it won't process for the other points, the other features in this structure damage feature layer. The other thing I wanted to show you is show credits. This is a very low computationally difficult process, so it's only like 1 credit. Some processes I've seen take up to 100 credits. Sometimes if you're geocoding, say, 1 million addresses, it might use up 1 million credits, which can be a problem. Credits, they can be used up. We have a limit on the credits that we use, but anyways, those are important things to know. And then typically you would run analysis, and then the output feature, this named layer, would become a hosted feature layer in your contents with the original damage and structure, but 1 more column of % cover that would be the forested area around each of those points. Again, I'm going to skip that step right there just for time's sake, but we'll do one more example of analysis before we go on. The same thing would apply as if you did a join, which is exactly the same steps in a process, an optional step. again, you could join the same layer we were just looking at with USA counties. You can do this on your own time. It'll and it really, what that does is it changes the attributes in your table and downloads it into your contents at the same time. Good. Moving down through the exercise, proximity to ANR offices. This I've pre-processed, and I'm going to copy that name because I'll be able to search for it at the end of the steps here. And what that would do is it'll let me check to see what is the most efficient route from the ANR office, and that's right over on the side. I'm going to go out of order slightly here. This is one of the next steps, is I want to change the symbology of the ANR offices. The way I do that is I'm going to reduce the analysis tabs over here on the pane. So go ahead and do this right now with me. Do the arrow that drops it down so we make it all the way back to where it shows our contents. Now, because I'm going to be working with it, I'm going to take my ANR location CSV. I like to put these at the top, whatever I'm working on, and sort them out later. And I am going to click the the change style options. I'll click that there. I'm also going to close the table down here on the bottom. It's in the way. So I'm changing the style of the ANR locations. I have a 1 there because I've done this exercise already today. And so this was the second time I'm running through. What I'm going to do is I will go ahead with location is fine. I'm going to click the options for select drawing style. See, I'm going to there's only a certain number of style options there are in the color ramp. And so when it gets down to other, there's all of these offices that are all in gray. But that's actually going to be the most important feature for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on that gray dot. So to back up, just so you can see what I did, you can stay here if you're already here. I'm going to go to my ANR location style, click options under drawing style, unique symbols. I'm going to scroll down using my roller and click on that little gray dot. So you can see all these different colors. You can change your transparency here, both for your fill, which is the inside of the icon, or you can do the outline changes. But what I want to do is make it something kind of intuitive by clicking shape. And under shape, there's going to be another drop-down option. So if you follow me, I went to the gray dot, went to shape. Now I'm going to do the drop-down next to shapes. There's a ton of different options here, including one I just want to mention. Won't click it, but down at the bottom you see custom images. So you can create little custom icons that you can bring in your map for some really neat cartographic design. But for now, we're just going to go about midway where it says general infrastructure and click on that. Because I want to pick something that looks sort of like a house or a building. So it's again, intuitive, but that's too small. We want this to really pop. So I'm going to make the size 30. It's going to make it really stand out a little bit more. And then I'm going to click OK. See how it shows up here on the map like this. Then I'm going to click OK on the bottom of the screen. You have to click OK and then done to come all the way out. If you don't click done, if you cancel somehow or you move out of it, then all your changes won't be saved. So here we got the local cooperative extension office. That might be a resource for services. Back to analysis now. So we're going with the Caldor structures that now are only being displayed as the 10 structures that were damaged. I'm going to go up to analysis, features analysis in this case. Use proximity is the second from the bottom. And we're going to do find nearest. Good. So it already recognizes the two features that are within the scene. The Caldor structures would be 1. The ANR structures would be 2. And then the next option down would be driving distance or drive time. So we can click either one of these. I'll go with driving distances. Either one would be good. And then we'd scroll down a little bit. Technically, you could put in some barriers. So if you had like a county line impediment, if you're doing this in like a larger area and you wanted to stay in your county and you were on a border or something, you might have a barrier of counties, but we won't do anything about that. To limit the number of nearest locations to 1, so you only pick the 1 nearest, and limit search to 100 miles, and everything else can be pretty much remain the same. And nearest ANR locations to Caldor 2. I'll leave that as a default. Click include route layer. And then you would want to make sure that you leave the use current map extent on, and make sure that you only have the area that you want to analyze in your map. So I'd want to make sure I have the office. I might have to zoom out a little bit to get the office and the structures. And then I could click run analysis, but again, that's going to take 2 or 3 minutes. All the processing is fairly slow, but to save yourself time, I showed you here down on step 7 on page 20, there's the nearest ANR facility structures. I rendered that earlier today. So if I go into my map and add data, search for layers, I want to make sure it's on ArcGIS Online. It should be included everywhere. So I shared it to everyone. There we go. Actually, it wasn't updated since last time. And then you can add that last one in there. And this would be the results of what we saw here. So you would have then, I'm going to move back out of this. You'd see the nearest facilities and the route map to those points. You might need to turn off, say, the point because you already have the facilities, and you might want to move stuff into the correct order. So it's underneath, but there you have a line map for driving directions. I bring this process up because it's just a neat example of how you can use the analysis tools, but simultaneously, this is really useful for some of our tour map functions. That is a story map template that you can use, and other web mapping applications. Good. Save your data. Let's do another save. Before and after analysis, that's a good thing. Last thing I'm going to have you do, I'm going to actually fire perimeter data. This is optional, but this is super cool. If any of you are interested in fire data, when my property was on fire, I was head over heels stoked when I found this data set. There's a FTP site that has all kinds of fire data from partnering organizations with CAL FIRE. And if you copy and paste that URL into your browser, I'll give you a second to do that. So you can go to the exercise, page 20, midway down, there's this URL. Go ahead and paste that into your browser. And what we'll do is we'll scroll down to the second from the bottom. And I'll just give you just a super brief overview. This is GIS data that's all the partnering organizations that does firefighting within California. There's and if I back up a directory, you'll see this is inside incident data. And if I go up another directory, this is inside GIS. There's also IR, which is near real-time data from contractors that collect data, and then also partnering organizations like the NEAROPS from USGS that fly operations for fires, as well as the CAL FIRE pilots as well. But I'm going to go back into the incident data, and this is ordered in date. And then talking about a rich repository of data, if you want to do time lapse of fire perimeters, and I'm just going to go with one fire perimeter now for time's sake. We'll go down to the very bottom and click on that, and you'll see this last file, this prim file. That is actually a shape file. So if you click on that, it's a relatively small file, so it should only take a second to download. And if I go to that file in my folder, see, I've already downloaded it once today, and I just go inside of it. It's zipped up, so it's not really, it's already ideally set up for ArcGIS Online because it's got all these component parts of the shape file all zipped up, so you can see it's in the right format for what you want. Now I can go back to my map. So I can go back to my map over here after I've downloaded that second from last perimeter file. Go to add data. Oh, someone just dropped off something for me. It looks like a drone. Excellent. All right. So I'm going to go down to add file from layer from file. And remember this is where you had shape files, and it noted that you need to have it zipped, zip archive for the file. Well, that's how the file comes down from the FTP site. So we can choose file, and it remembers that I've been looking at files in my downloads. You might have to navigate to your PC and to your downloads, and I'll give you a second to do that. And when you do, you can click on the one that you just downloaded and click open. And then import layer. So this covered up the whole area that we're looking at. Sometimes having layers over the top of layers can be a cartographic plus. Sometimes they're a minus, but you can use this as a strategy for muting your layers. You can change symbology really nicely sometimes like this, and it automatically, when it comes in, it defaults to allowing you to change the drawing style. So what I'll do is I'll click the drawing style right here, the unique symbols. There's really only one because it's a perimeter file. And again, it's got a long name. We can change the name after the fact. Click the gray little dot here. And from here, we can select the fill transparency is almost transparent. And the outline to something that is going to not be, say, be dark colored and not transparent. So you want the outline to be completely dark or opaque. Good. And then click OK. And see how then it just makes your fire burn area perimeter really pop on the map. A little bit of a cartographic effect going there. And one of the key things is you need to do is click OK and done. Now you have a bunch of funky file names in here. By the way, if you spent, like if I ran into this, I'll go back to the screen. When I downloaded every single one of these perimeter dates and kept adding them sequentially into my map, it broke my map. You're only allowed to have a certain number of layers in here before things start breaking. So what I would probably recommend is remove things that you don't need. Like I don't need the point feature for the ANR building because I know it's there. So I might remove that by clicking the three dots and clicking remove. And yes, remove. And then looking to see if there's anything else that's what you don't want. Changing the names is important sometimes. Again, we did that early on, and we don't necessarily need to do that right now, but I might simplify this name a little bit just because it'll be reflected on my final map. So this is the 2021 Caldor perimeter or fire perimeter. And it even has the time of day that was compiled. And okay, good. So now we have a number of layers. If I turn off, I can turn on and off the layers if I am so inclined. But now we have a pretty good something to work with. But one of the final things is, before we start publishing this stuff, is that I like to change the background. This normal background is not pleasing. It is, okay, I take that back. Sometimes it's very pleasing. In this case, it just might not be suited for this type of this circumstance. In this case, what I might, and oh, by the way, you go up to base map at the top part of the screen. This was in that super brief tutorial that was earlier on that you might have done during the break. You click on the base map, and you'll see that there are 28 different options here. You can also find base maps like we did earlier with the fire potential through the Living Atlas, but this is the standard base maps here. And one of my favorite is the hybrid imagery. I was kind of pleased to note, though, there's a new one in here, OpenStreetMap Blueprint, which is really kind of neat. I'm going to just turn that on for a second, even though it's not really appropriate necessarily for this map, but it's zoom dependent. So if I zoom into an area close enough, it'll start showing features and houses or structures and all kinds of things. So it's just kind of a neat layer that might be useful for some occasions. Maybe or maybe not for this occasion, but what I would prefer here probably, because it's intuitive for people to see the aerial imagery of the site along with the feature or the area, the location names, is the base map of hybrid imagery. The reason why this is useful, especially when I shared this map with everybody during the fire, is people could zoom in and find their particular house and see how close the local fire is. Actually, I know the guy that lives here. It's a good friend of mine that lives right on that, just randomly zoomed into his house. So that's, yeah, so there's, and I was giving him information about how close the fire was to his house once in a while. So, but having that hybrid imagery in the background is pretty nice. Once you have your map relatively well set up, the way that you like it, you might want to change the names of some of your some of the labels in here. Remove anything that you may not want, and I'll show you why here in a moment. The next step, and I want to give you some time to play with it here toward in the last little bit, is we're going to publish it as a web mapping application. So right here we have the basic the map that we've created. We need to save that. If you were ready to share it with everybody out there, you might click share with everyone. That way it will become discoverable on ArcGIS Online. So anyone that, when we look for adding data from ArcGIS Online, if you click everyone, if they search for this given map or use the tags that you've included in there, they can find it. Sometimes you might want to only do it with your organization, and again, you can do it with your members of your groups. But for now, I will save it for everyone because I'm going to delete it very shortly here after this. And everyone includes the everybody in your organization. And then you have to click done at the bottom. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to show you a couple different versions of how this works out, because this has been shared with everyone. I can copy and paste this URL right here and bring it up. I'll bring it up in a completely different web browser and paste it in there. And you'll see the web map that I've just created. And what happened? Brought it in. Oh, there it is. Just took a minute for it to draw. This is what it would look like, but this is kind of cumbersome. This is not really, ideal. You think there's you don't have a clean legend. It's just sort of, not what I'd really want to share with someone. The answer to that is to create a web mapping application. And the way that that's done is I'm going to reduce that, is go down to create web app. So Maggie mentioned earlier, or noted that there's a bunch of divergent ways of creating web mapping applications. This is just show and tell right now. You don't have to do anything, just watch. I left this tab open on purpose that had all these other options here. One of those is your experience builder. So I could go in here and bring in I could import my maps and then build an experience in my experience builder, which has all kinds of new options, which is neat. I could do full screen blank and create that, and then import a map, bring in a map from that we just created. And so this is one environment where you can create your web mapping application. You can also use the story map builder. Then you can import your data in there. But there's all these other options that are in here that I just would be remiss to not mention. But again, I'm going to go back to this, and I'm going to do it the traditional way right now. And this is honestly the way I default to doing it a lot of the time, just because I've done it this way so many times. So if you didn't see what I did there, I went to share. I went to create new web app. This is important. If everyone is shared, then this new web app will be displayed for anyone, anywhere. And there's all these different options, including some story maps, but there'll be instant apps are the ones that we want. You can show all different options. You can say there's collector apps, compare apps. There's a whole ton of different map options, but I'm going to go to show all. And if I kept going, you'll see, quite a number of these. I'm going to select basic for now. So the second one over, basic. And we could preview them or create web app, and we'll create web app. And I'm going to just extend the name here, just so it pops out in my my contents a little bit. They'll retain the same tags that you had on your original web map. And I'm going to just put it in my default folder and click done. Good. It's going to take a second. All right. Next. Huh. It's interesting that it's giving me some various options. Huh. It's changed a bit. Changed a fair bit. Okay, so here what you can do is you can set up your map here to get it all the way ready for publishing. Hey Shane, have you seen these changes before? If you're there hanging out, this is actually a new environment. They've updated it since.
Yeah, I was just gonna say they just rolled out a bunch of updates. So I haven't seen those changes recently.
This must have been really recently, because
very
recently.
It was just within the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, because this wasn't like this like a month or so ago when I last did this.
No.
Okay. Well, because we've been working with some of the other map builders and they're kind of create them so they emulate each other. So one thing that's neat is then it allows you to select the map. It's already selected, gives you about information. So it gives you little prompts here. And once you have your map the way you like, you can set up, there's some different views that was prompted at the beginning. One thing you'll notice about your map here, what the heck happened to the, this is odd. Usually there's a title banner across the top that I was going to show you how to edit. One thing you'll see that configuring the app at the top, it has the name that was originally given to the map previously, and you will want to go back and change that name to get rid of the underscores because I gave it a kind of a funky name.
Sean, quick question. Were you trying to get to the instant app or the web app builder?
I think, well, I'm going to go back, share, create a web app.
Go to web app builder. That's probably what you're thinking.
Oh, yeah. Okay. It's just, configurable apps. Oh, okay. That's why. Same name. So
yes.
Everyone, just so we're on the same page, somehow this got changed to the a different default. The with one of the updates. If you go back to your web map, so you might have to do the back button, click share, create web app. Make sure the center option web app builder is checked. I'm just going to change the name slightly because it's going to create a new one in my contents. Scroll down, get started. This is still different than what I'm used to, but it's a little closer.
It's a little closer.
I didn't think that the default would have changed that much, but it has.
Yeah,
this is a great thing.
They have changed things.
Yes. So now at least I have like the title at the top with some different information. So you can change your map here. You could choose a different web map if you chose to. You can add widgets. This is actually familiar because this is very similar now to the experience builder. So, I mean, granted, it's a little laid out different, but the same idea. But there's so you can set a home point, include that on your map. You can include these widgets. These are the widgets. So you can have zoom to, and that matters if you're on a cell phone. You can have coordinates. You can have attribute table. You can include navigate on some of these. And then you can change the title here. I'm going to just change a little bit. Practice map. You don't want to include map makers hate it when you do that. Caldor Fire. Enter. So that changed it here at the top, which is really nice. You also want to go back and change it because that's going to show up in different settings. But you can search for places. You can add in, set up more widgets. If they're left blank, they will remain blank. But now that we have all of this in here, and granted, this is an entire another workshop too, by the way. If you didn't know, so there was like dozens and dozens of different templates. That's what that was called before when I selected basic. Those basic story map, all those are templates. This is a templated layout, and there's dozens of them. If you're in Experience Builder, which is what I use most recently, then it will it'll have help menus that are option. These ones I don't see a help menu so much, but you can always search for you just use the ArcGIS web app builder and search online. A lot of us techie kind of nerds, and I resemble that statement, like to put their content online, just like we are doing with this content here. And there's directions for virtually anything you need to do if you just have the keyword searches. So now that we have this map here and we're coming to the end, what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this, and then I'm going to launch it. So this is what my map is going to look like. Again, if I go and I copy and paste that URL and I put it in my other browser and enter, it's going to look a fair bit nicer than what I just had there. And it's also, if you noticed when we brought it in, there was the option for setting up so it's more appropriate for cell phones. And that's the way a lot of people use this kind of data. That's I'd almost say most people in a lot of cases. It's it renders out nicely even in that format. So here we go. We have this map I mentioned before, and this is just show and tell only. So if you wanted to do that just now, what you would have done, I'm going to go back here. You would save and then launch. This same setup is the same in virtual. You just have to look for those keywords, save and launch, on any one of your map building apps and or your app building functions, and that's the workflow. But last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here to our site builder, an ANR site builder. I'm going to put in the URL for an iframe. And then I'm going to update that asset. Oh no, our server's messed. Oh, well, you got the idea from putting it into another pane. The only thing would be is this map would then appear on our website, but I'm putting it into the wrong server locations. And we don't need to use time to look at that now. But while we have time, I want to do just with the last like 6 minutes, I want you to go ahead and play with your map and play with your web mapping application and try publishing it. And you can copy and paste the URLs over into another browser or another tab and look at them there. And if for some reason something isn't right, like if I click on one of these on here and it brings up all of like more information than I want or different information, the way to solve that is to go back to your original map. Which one am I on here? Oh, this is on this one. Too many tabs open. There we go. So what I would do is I would go back to my original app. It'll let me. And I would change that information here. So I can change the name here so it shows up on the map appropriately. Practice fire mapping. And save that. That's one way that you can version it. So if you want to put a date in the title, so say this is what the fire looked like as of a given date, you can include that in there, and then it's more discoverable that way.
Hey, Sean, can I ask you to do something real quick?
Yes,
can
sir.
you go back to the Experience Builder app, the one you created? Could you just point out where the layer list widget is in the upper right-hand corner?
Oh,
the legend widget is.
Oh, here.
Yeah. So you can those are included by default. There's a layer list and there's a legend widget up there as well.
Right.
And then one other person had a quick question about, can you limit the extent in a web app? From Esri's web apps out of the gate, you can't. If you are programming your own web app using JavaScript and the JavaScript API from Esri, you can do that. There's a way to build it so if you leave the extent, it snaps you back, but you can't do that with the out-of-the-box web applications.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Sean.
Well, thank you. If anyone has any comments right now, let's we got like 3 more minutes. I'll open the floor up. One note though, we will send out an evaluation form that you can that please, if you could fill that out, we'd really appreciate it. And hopefully this was a good way to spend your Friday afternoon, and I hope you all learned a lot, and we have more workshops coming up. And we have definitely ramped up our virtual workshop training curriculum. So there's all increasingly more to be to see. And we're always trying to improve that. So again, if you make comments in your evaluations, that would be great. But any comments or questions, thoughts on this? You don't have to do it in the chat. You can just answer, and I'm going to stop sharing.
Thanks, you guys, for joining us. We really appreciate it. Glad you could spend your time with us. But we'll be stopping the recording now.
Yes.
And we'll let you all go. Have a great weekend.
Thank you very much. And don't forget, we have office hours if that is useful for you.